Hi, this is Ken Jarecke, and welcome to Talking Pictures. Normally we talk about making pictures. Today we're actually going to make some pictures, or at least you're going to see some pictures I made. I had the opportunity, I wanted to test out the new Sony 604 for a project I'm working on to see if it would have some uses, and I got a hold of one, and I got a hold of a couple of A9s to use with it. So we're going to see how that went. I shot a couple of days of rodeo. Now, there's a couple of things I want to talk about with the 600. The first thing is you always pick it up by its handle. You don't pick it up by the body. These long lenses, especially with a monopod attached, it's too much lens, too much weight for the body, the mount of the body to support. So if you see somebody picking up a camera by the body when it has a long lens on it, you know that focal plane lens mount is out of square, and so half the frame, there's a good chance it's going to be out of focus. That's number one. Number two, always use your lens shade. The lens shade not only protects it from the sun and reflections on your front element, but it also protects it from rain, it protects it from dirt. You can see we got a lot of dirt on there from the rodeo already. The next thing is you want to attach your strap to the lens, not the camera body. There's no weight's going to be supported by the camera body. Now this lens is pretty light, deceptively so. It looks heavier than it is. It weighs about 6.7 pounds. That said, you always want to use a monopod. Unless you're shooting birds or airplanes, something like that, if you're shooting anything for any length of time, you want to use the monopod. You hold the camera with your hand under here. This is how you shoot it, just like that. Your hand doesn't belong out here or under here or resting on here. It belongs on the focusing ring. You got your buttons there that you can easily reach. That's when your that's where your hand belongs when you're shooting with a 6. I like to use the back button focus when I'm shooting stills with this beast. Besides that, that's about it. You want to use the monopod, like I said. I use this old steel Gitzo monopod. It's not as light or convenient as the new carbon fiber models, but the problem with the carbon fiber models, when you smack somebody with them, there's a good chance they're going to get back up. So stick with the good French steel. Speaking of French steel, this monopod, it's been to 9 Olympic Games, which means it officially has more institutional knowledge than the entire editorial staff at Time Magazine at this point. So I'm not gonna switch to the carbon fiber and lose that knowledge. When you're sitting the 6 down, once again you're holding it from the handle. You lay it flat. Now normally there'd be a booster on here, so that would rest pretty flat on the ground like that. You keep the monopod sticking straight up, and you put that flat on the ground, and then tilt the monopod against a fence or a wall, whatever you can, if you do have to set it down, just so nobody trips over it. You want to set it always on the ground, never on the front, and that way it'll keep your lens safe and keep you happy. That said, let's get rid of that and let me start our video from the rodeo, and I'll give you commentary as I go along. Okay, so since I had 2 A9s, I decided to shoot shoot with both of them. So I shot with 35-1.4, the Sony G Master on one, 604 on the other. I shot everything in slow motion. So that was at my minimum ISO is usually 100. It was overcast most of the time. I shot at 120 frames per second, 100M on the XAVC SHD setting. Now, you'll notice I don't know anything about shooting video. This is the first time I've ever used the A9s. I've touched one once at a demo about 2 or 3 years ago when they first came out, but I've never used them. So I got these on Monday afternoon, and I started shooting with them on Tuesday afternoon at the rodeo. As far as video is concerned, I've never shot video, never used Premiere. I used Premiere once before last week for last week's episode of Talking Pictures. So you'll have to bear with me on some of this technical stuff. I'm learning it as I go. As far as shooting the 6 goes, I know how to shoot that because I started out very early in my career shooting a 600. As a young photographer, I got my first camera was a Nikon FM, and I sold a steer to buy the camera, and the money I had left to get a lens, I couldn't quite afford a good 50, but I could afford an E-series, which was a cheap series that Nikon put out, a 100 millimeter f2.8, which was a pretty cheap lens, but it got the job done, which also meant that my first normal lens on a camera was a 100 millimeter, not a 50. So I started out shooting long glass from the start. The next lens I bought was probably a 20, so I was at both extremes right from the start. The third lens I bought was a Nikon 300 4.5 because I had started shooting sports at that point. And around that time, shortly after I'd been shooting sports, I've been shooting it in kind of the newspaper / AP style, where as long as you had it sharp in your frame, you're shooting black and white, you're shooting for your output was going to be on newsprint, so you had a lot of forgiveness there. As long as the negative was sharp, you could blow it up and kind of find the picture within that negative. I had an early meeting, might have been about 17, maybe 18 years old, with Barbara Henkel, who was the director of photography at Sports Illustrated. And she told me how magazines worked. Magazines were all about the quality of the color captured. And so there was no room for overly blowing images up. The more image you had on your transparency, and you were shooting slide film, the better the quality. And so very quickly at that, and she gave me great advice. She said, fill your frame with the action. And so if you look at these images here, that's what I'm doing. I'm filling the frame with as tight as I can. And that's what the 604 is for. So the 604 was probably the 4th lens I bought. By that time, I was shooting Nikon F3s. And instead of having to sell a steer at that point, I had to sell a car to afford getting a 604. And so I went from having a not cool car to having a really not cool car, but I also had a 604. And the reason, this is at that time the 400 2.8 hadn't come out yet. And so there was a jump between the 300 2.8 to the 604. And the 400 2.8 was on its way, but the problem with the 400 2.8 was one of the main places I shot, well, the two main places I shot was a Memorial Stadium in Lincoln, Nebraska, which has pretty rough backgrounds and pretty long throws. It's football. And Rosenblatt stadium in South Omaha for the College World Series. And Rosenblatt had a bunch of advertisements on the back wall. And what that did, as you can see in some of this video, that it screwed up your background with these bright advertisements instead of a blue wall, which means you had to shoot tighter. And so a 604 shooting on the first base side, second base, a play at second base is getting tight. The shortstop laying out to catch a ground ball is going pretty much from, if he's on the dirt, from one side of your frame to the other. But it also gave you this great backgrounds. And so when I shoot with the 604, if you look at this like the steer wrestling here, that's a little loose for me, but you can get away with it because of the dark background. When you have that white fence in the background, the advertisements, you really got to get into what I call the pop zone. The pop zone is when you're so tight that the background just goes to a beautiful, out of focus, creamy bokeh type of thing. And that's what I aim for. Most people, when they shoot with the 6, they kind of shoot it as if they're going to shoot full frame, like this steer wrestling, and they never quite get into that pop zone where you're really pushing to the extreme close focusing of what the lens can handle. That's where I think the sweet spot is to work with this lens. Now, the thing with rodeo, I haven't shot a whole lot of rodeo, but I've shot enough. I've shot enough sports to tell you this stuff is dangerous when you're near the fence, when you're on the sidelines of a football game, when you're in the box shooting a baseball game. You got to think safety first. And when you're looking through this long tube, a 600, a 400, even a 300 2.8, you can get caught up in just what's in front of you, 50 yards out. And so staying on your toes, knowing where you are in your environment is crucial. Safety is crucial. You got to stay safe. Some of these shots, you can see I'm right up in there. And after the second day, the next morning I picked up my camera and I noticed there was some mud that had hit my lens, my 35 millimeter lens, and it was fused on there really good. And this dirt in these arenas, it's fairly well, it's muddy here, but it's not as cushiony as you think it's going to be. It's got sand in it. It's got other stuff in it that doesn't really matter as far as your lens is concerned. But if that clot of mud on the front element of my 35, if it would have hit me in the eye, and I don't shoot with my glasses when I'm shooting. I put my glasses in my pocket. If it would have hit me in the eye, that would have been like hospital time. It was just that hard and coming that fast to fuse on the front of that lens like that. I mean, I've got a nice nick on the 35 now that gives my lens a little bit of character that it didn't have before. As far as the 600, that's another reason why you keep that lens shade on there. 600, the front element of the 600 is just, it's not easy to replace that. That's going to be an expensive replacement. So basically, with the 600, with this kind of bareback riding here, the 600 too tight is just right. That's where I want to be. I want all that detail. I want all that stuff flying around. Basically, what I shot here, I shot. I'm shooting video. I want to see what I can do with the video. That's why I got hold of the glass. I wanted to see what I could do with it. And the idea is to get as tight as possible, as much detail as possible. And so when I'm shooting this slow motion, I'm basically shooting little still photographs. I think of every one of these video clips as a still photograph. So most of these, I think the longest clip I shot might have been 40 seconds in 2 days. So it's basically, I'm just shooting extended stills is how I'm looking at it. And that's, so it's basically, it translates right to stills as far as looking at this stuff. Now, the sunlit stuff here, I had some ND filters, the drop-in filters. The 604 uses a 40.5 rear filter. I had neutral density filters to use, but the sun came out just so seldomly. It just wasn't, and it was changing so fast. It was just easier to change the aperture or the ISO. Some of this stuff's going to get pretty high ISO wise. Most of this daylight stuff is shot at 100. Most of the cloudy stuff is shot at about 160, 200 ISO at the most. But you're shooting at 250 at 4. That's a lot of light, even when it's overcast and kind of a bright overcast or rain. If you think about that, now normally when you're shooting the 6, you keep it wide open because there's no trade. Say if you're shooting Kodachrome 64, you want the absolute best quality. Well, in bright sunlight, you're at a thousandth of a second at wide open is f4 at 64 ISO, and you're not going to trade your shutter speed for depth of field. You're not gaining anything from going to 5.6 from f4 with a 600 millimeter lens. So 500, 5.6, you're just losing sharpness due to motion when you're shooting stills. It's not doing you any good. So you're always shooting wide open with the 600. So I'm pretty sure this is the first time shooting that I've ever stopped down with a 600 millimeter lens. And you can see, as far as image quality, as far as depth of field, there's really it really doesn't gain you anything by stopping down. So the only thing you're doing is controlling your light. Now, as far as controlling your light, I kept my histogram at about the 70 percentile range. So I never clipped my whites on the right-hand side of the Instagram, or the histogram, not the Instagram. Meaning that my goal was to keep my whites under control. And then I toned these a little bit, not a whole lot. Everything's toned as I would a raw image in Photoshop, except I'm working in Premiere here. And what that does is I lost my train of thought. The color, no, I'm talking about the white balance, sorry. So with rodeo, it's like shooting football. You got bright white hats most of the time with shadow, which creates shadows under the face. So if you don't get your histogram just right, you're going to lose those whites. And there are one or two shots in here, clips, that I kept in just for that reason. Back on the tie-down steer roping, there you could see that the white hat was getting blown out a little bit, and the faces were getting a little dark. There's no way to, it's just one of those things. If you go too much HDR, if you try to boost your shadows and knock your whites and highlights down, it's just going to start looking fake. So you gotta pick your poison. As you could see in a lot of these clips, it's raining pretty hard. I worked the A9s pretty hard. Everybody's soaked, everybody's wet, and that was true for the cameras as well. after working in rain on the second day, I started to get some major error messages from one of the bodies. So if you're shooting with A9s, you might want to invest in some rain gear. I kept shooting, and the files turned out fine, and I let it dry out overnight, and the next day it was just fine. So just be aware, rain gear is probably needed for these cameras. As far as weather is concerned, being prepared when you're shooting sports outside is everything. Montana's a beautiful place, but if you're not prepared, it's going to make you pay. So I had a raincoat, I had a baseball cap. There's official PRCA rules and most of the rodeo rules. You'll see that everybody inside the arena is wearing long sleeves and a Western hat, and most of them are wearing boots, except the guys who are dealing with bulls at ground level. Those are official rules. It's part of the branding. So I figure, I'm wearing a baseball cap. I do that to keep the sun out of my eyes, but also I just kind of wear a hat. I wear long sleeves just so I don't stand out too much from the rest of the crowd that are right next to the arena. Because I'm trying to get into spots that your normal spectator won't end up in. So just whatever environment you're in, whether it's a football game, choosing the right clothes is pretty crucial to how your shoot goes. As far as that goes, I also don't carry much. I carried the 2 A9 bodies. I carried the 35 on one, the 604 on the other. I brought a monopod that was always attached to the camera. The strap on the camera goes around my neck for the 35 or my shoulder. The strap on the lens goes on another shoulder to carry the big rig. I didn't have any extra batteries. Normally I'd carry a couple extra batteries, but it turns out I didn't need them. I shot about 3.5 hours each day, and didn't need the batteries even when you're pushing focus with this long glass. I just used regular cards. The regular cards I use for still photography. I just wanted to see how everything worked. On the second day, I did shoot video cards, that high speed SD cards. I didn't see any difference in the two. They both worked fine. The other things I carried were the neutral density filters, which are 40, and it's 40.5 millimeter, so they're really tiny filters. There's 3 of them. They're the Gobi filters. They're really, really sweet. They got caps on either side, so they're all screwed together. So they're about the size of $3 half in your pocket. That doesn't take up any space. Besides that, I got my wallet and my iPhone, so I'm traveling light. I got my glasses in a usually a shirt pocket, but since I had a raincoat this day, I put them in the raincoat pocket and zipped it up. Besides that, the only other things I had was a chamois for my camera and lenses to help to keep them clean. So I travel light. You should travel light. I don't know how people travel with a backpack and they're running around shooting pictures. That's a mystery to me. So travel light, take what you need, know what you're going for. Those are my rules of engagement right there. Let's see. No face in shadows. Yeah, the face in the shadows was usually okay. You can see, especially in this shot, that's overcast. You can see the white fence in the background. This is not the pop zone. This is a little bit looser than I'd like to be. But even so, the background isn't overly distracting. The face is good. The bull is good. and the hat isn't blown out. So that's basically where I want to be. Those things flopping around on the underside of the bull are his lungs. I think that's a technical term. I just know if you ever get kicked in those lungs that you'll have a hard time breathing. And that is an old rodeo joke. Kind of like the monopod joke before, swatting somebody with a monopod. It started out with the guys who were shooting 4x5 speed graphics, and when they switched to the Nikon F or a Contex or something, they always said they liked the smaller cameras, but if you had to hit somebody with them, there's a good chance they'd get back up. Let me see what else I got on my list here. I never really found the recipe for shooting autofocus video with this camera. I'm basically using the default here. Here you can see it's getting dark. This is on the second day. And I just wanted to point this out. This is probably 2000, 2500 ISO. We're really pushing the files on these cameras at this point. I think the next clip after this is 3200 ISO. And that's as dark as I went, or that's as high with the ISO as I went. That's as high as I was comfortable with. And this is 2/50th of a second at f4. So this is 3200 ISO right here. You can see that white helmet. I can't control it anymore. It's a little blown out. But anyways, I never really found the recipe. There's your pop zone. That's the pop zone right there. Look how beautiful that is. And that was at high ISO. This gives you an idea what the light was overall. Pretty miserable. Anyways, this is from the first day when we actually had a little bit of sunset happening. This is about 9 o'clock at night in the mountains of above Red Lodge in Montana. And we had a chance to have some really nice light here. But that's all we got. And the next day, that stuff that was shot at 2000 or 3200 ISO, that was pretty dark. That was shot about 9 p.m. with heavy overcast, a little bit of rain still falling. That was pretty miserable conditions. And at the end of the day, that video, in my opinion, and like I said, I don't know anything about video or Premiere, but in my opinion, that video was pretty usable. This stuff is I love, because we've got real highlights there, and we've got real dark shadows in that bull, and we're kind of good on both ends. I'm happy with that. And all I'm pulling from is my experience with still photography. So maybe a real person shooting video would disagree. I had this framing element with the lasso there, the lariat, the rope, and I just waited for something to happen in my frame. Anyways, to get back to the autofocus, I never really found the recipe for shooting with the 604 on autofocus. You can see it. I kind of lose the focus, especially whenever somebody comes into the frame in front of me. A lot of times, like right there, I can kind of play with it and control it. But as far as, on the second day, I tried to use a more narrow focusing window, and I liked the flexible window as far as autofocus was concerned. But I needed to set up my back buttons instead usually use your back buttons to focus when you're shooting sports with long glass. I needed to set up the back buttons to cancel the autofocus so I could take over manual focus. The problem with manual focusing, these new cameras, And if you talk to the technicians or the designers of these cameras, they'll tell you that the ground glass, you can't change the ground glass. So if you're shooting with a Nikon F3 or a Nikon F or a Canon F1 and you were depending on manual focus, you could change your ground glass to optimize the use of long lenses. And it was very gritty ground glass, completely blank. You didn't have any crosshairs or split screen or anything like that. It was just a ground glass. And it was really optimized for manual focus of long glass. But we don't have that option anymore. The reason we don't have that option is the designers will tell you that nobody shoots manual focus anymore. But they'll also tell you in the next breath that the reason nobody shoots autofocus or manual focus anymore is because it's hard to manually focus with the screens in the camera. So it's a catch-22 at this point. I would like the ability to just turn off the focus, and it's there. I just didn't find it out in the 2 days I shot with these cameras. You can see here, this is just the default with a flexible focusing spot, and I'm not changing it. Every once in a while, I'll lose focus. I'm not using the touch screen. Touch screen, shooting action with the touch screen makes me uncomfortable. I want that camera close to my face, and I want to see exactly what's happening in my frame. You know, maybe with a secondary monitor and a touch screen, you know, that might make sense. But really what I want is to be able to use that joystick on the back of the camera and choose a spot, engage the focus, and disengage the focus real simply. And I know there's a way to do it with these cameras, but I just personally haven't figured it out yet. 604. The trick for me, and I think it's that holds true today, is to fill your frame, whether you're shooting with the 35 or the 6 actually. And there's no cropping, there's no I'm not going into the frame with any of this video, and I don't do that with the stills I shoot either. I try to fill the frame, know what I'm going for, and see there we lost our focus a bit, but it's kind of a beautiful shot, so I wanted to keep it in. Normally, you know, I'd get rid of it. So fill your frame, put that focusing screen where it needs to be, engage your back button focus, keep your focus off your trigger button, your shutter release button, and use your back button focus. And I use it as a power focus, so it goes in and out when I want it to. And I keep the lens in as close as I can to the pop zone, and you choose your backgrounds accordingly. You know, there's only so many backgrounds at a rodeo. There's only so many backgrounds at any sporting event you go to, because as a still photographer, you're limited. But as far as, oh man, see, this was going to be a nice shot. This happens whether you're shooting stills or video. You have people walking into your frame at the wrong time. You see the focus kind of shifted there. But keep it tight. Keep in the pop zone. Don't shoot it as you would a 50 millimeter where you're going to have like somebody's head and somebody's toes in the frame. And then when you get too tight, find a picture within that picture. That's the key for me when shooting this lens. Then when they get really tight, you switch to the 35. We're getting to the end of here. I tried to keep it under 30 minutes. We went This video is 30 minutes and 19 seconds. I didn't want to bore you with more than 30 minutes of this stuff, so I apologize for those last 19 seconds. This is on the first day. Hadn't quite realized I was shooting video, so it's a little rocky. But it's a good ender. The other thing to remember is all the action I outputted at about 25%. The non-action stuff, the kids throwing bales, the guy walking with his suitcase through the mud, that I outputted at about 50%. So it's still slow motion, but it's half the slow motion as the real slow motion. I didn't mess around going under 25%. I didn't interpolate any frames. I didn't use any keyframes to make the speed go up or down. It's pretty much exactly how I shot it. The next episode of Talking Pictures, Paul Bellinger will be back. He'll once again he'll be the stand-in, and I'll try to answer the questions that he has, that are kind of the every photographer's questions. He's the stand-in for the audience. If you have any specific questions, leave them in the comments. Paul will get to them. I'd like to thank Paul Giroux. He's a Sony artisan. He helped me go through the menus and figure out exactly what I wanted to do with these cameras. Ben Manlove's my local Sony rep here in Montana, and he's the one that got me the gear to use. That's it. Well, besides that, we've got our book of the day. Is a classic book that every photographer should own. It's Stay This Moment by Sam Abel. And the reason I chose this book is Sam did a lot of good work. Beautiful Western photos. And they're in this book. And he's working with a Leica. He's working single frame at a time. Instead of Kodachrome 64, a lot of this is Kodachrome 25, so he took it another level. It's all about composition and moment with Sam. There's that Western theme there. But the composition and the moment with sports photography, especially rodeo photography, kind of all comes together. Sam did some rodeo stuff, but he was shooting, in the arena with Leicas with short glass. So it's a great book, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.